Welcome to GovCast, connecting with federal IT's top decision makers. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research. With me today is managing editor Ross John Fortuna. Hi, Ross.
Hello.
You had the opportunity to chat with Ramona Carey, Assistant Chief Data Officer for the Natural Resources and Environmental Mission at USDA. How'd it go?
That's right. Ramona's got kind of a job title that's a mouthful, but in practice, she's really deals with a lot of environmental data, and obviously at USDA, the biggest part of that is the U.S. Forest Service. So it was an interesting conversation. The reason I had wanted to talk to her was because you don't think of the Forest Service, maybe not you, I don't know, I can't get inside your head, but I know I don't normally think of the U.S. Forest Service as a place that has a ton of data to be protected, to be maintained, and to be analyzed. I was wrong, obviously, and as our conversation brings forward. And, Ramona comes from DHS, so before the Forest Service. So she talked about those kinds of different approaches to data and modernization and things like that.
Yeah, this definitely is a unique conversation, given that, as you said, my first thought when I hear the U.S. Forest Service isn't necessarily IT, but I do know, Ross, that you are a fan of saying that the computer is everything, and I think this is a very clear example of that. Before we listen to your conversation, I just want to give a little caveat to our listeners that our connection wasn't the best. So the audio quality may sound a little different than what you're used to, but we really want to share this episode with you. So thank you for understanding. Before we listen to that conversation, Ross, is there anything that our listeners should keep in mind listening to the conversation?
I would be cognizant of what she talks about, a few minutes in, about the ways that USDA in all its component parts, including the Forest Service, is working on its data modernization, because there is a lot that transfers for all agencies in their modernization journeys.
All right. With that in mind, let's take a listen to your conversation.
Ramona Carey is the Assistant Chief Data Officer for the Natural Resources and Environment Mission at USDA. She joins me now to talk about data strategy, government, and her career. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So you spent a long time at the Department of Homeland Security in the Office of the Inspector General as an intelligence analyst. How has that ported over to your job at the USDA and the Forest Service?
Well, it was a big change for me. So as you said, I was previously at the Department of Homeland Security. That's where I entered the federal government. And I was there for 12 years. I came into the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and then I spent some time in a few other offices and wound up at the Office of the Inspector General before coming to the Forest Service. The data and analytics work from DHS transferred very nicely. That's one of the great things about data. I think thinking through the skill set of having a sort of a creative thinking mind with relation to data and how to solve problems with data and how to govern data, that's very transferable. So that was really nice. The mission, of course, is very different. So it felt like a big leap for me, a big change when I left DHS, where I had really, spent my entire federal career. It felt like a big change to come to the Forest Service. But I was intentional about it. I wanted to do something that was, I got to a point at DHS where the work I was doing was really fulfilling, really challenging, really dynamic, but I wanted to align my personal interests with my work, which is something that, was not always that easy to do. But I thought I'm at a point in my career where if I can do that, I would just be so happy doing that. And so I thought hard about what are those personal interests that I would think I could maybe make aligned with my career. And it was really something related to nature and natural environment, land management, natural resources. So I was very deliberately targeting USDA or the Department of Interior, and came over as the Assistant Chief Data Officer for the Natural Resources and Environment Mission area, which has me responsible for all of the enterprise data governance in the Forest Service, which is the one agency under the Natural mission area at USDA.
How does that manifest? What are the kind of data problems and issues that you're dealing with that are so different from your previous federal jobs?
Well, one thing that is different for me at the Forest Service and DHS is the type of data we deal with. We have a lot of geospatial data. DHS does have some geospatial data, but DHS also has a lot of transactional data related to people and border crossings and goods. And so the Forest Service is quite different. It's a lot of data about the land, a lot of data about our forests that we manage and our grasslands, and a ton of geospatial data. So that's really been fun. And also the time horizon for the data we look at is a little different too. We're measuring outcomes related to the lands that we manage, and sometimes those have a very long time horizon, which is a little different than some of the data I work with. So it's been a very fun challenge.
So to that end, I mean, how do you keep that data secure? What kind of challenges do you have as far as security, maintenance, modernization? I mean, this is not a new. It's not like CBP or even DHS. It's a much older agency.
That's right. Yeah. We've been collecting data for more than 100 years, and it is a really big challenge. There's a lot to do when thinking about data modernization. We have a lot of data, a lot of legacy systems. We have a big field presence, 154 national forests, 20 grasslands. And until recently, we've never had a chief data office before. So there's a history of decentralized and non-standardized work with data as people were sort of getting things done as they needed to accomplish the mission throughout the Forest Service. And so it was a challenge, a really exciting one. And for me, I think one of the things I've really tried to think about is how efficient enterprise data modernization requires thinking about data as part of a system. I really think systems theory and systems thinking is very useful in lots of areas. And so, for example, the Forest Service system, really any government agency system, it includes organizational entities like programs, budgets, strategic goals. It includes technology, and it includes a lot of people. And all of those things are interdependent and connected. And so kind of knowing which part of the system you can influence and where we should modernize to create the most business value is one of the most challenging things. There is, can I offer an analogy? There's an analogy that I like to use sometimes.
Love to hear it.
Okay. I've heard sometimes, the sort of data, IT, business relationship described in many different analogies. Sometimes it's a house. The house is the IT and the belongings are the data, the people who live there, the business users. I think I've heard restaurant and supermarket, but one that I like to think of is a library. So you think about a library, it's got people who come into the library looking for information. Those are the business users. It's got a lot of infrastructure, shelves, the building itself, hard catalog software and hardware. That's IT. And then it's got all the information in the books, the words, the paragraphs, the stories, the data visualizations. That's all the data. And those things in the library, they really are a system that have to work together. So decisions in one area affect experiences in another area. So if the shelves are too tall, people can't reach the books. If the humidity is high, the books get moldy. If the books are in the wrong language, people can't use them, and so on. So it's this interconnected system. And if you're thinking a library, you would want to make it easier for people to find the right books and the information they need within those books. That's exactly what we're trying to do with data modernization. We've got tons and tons of books, let's say, tons and tons of data, and we want to make it easier for people to find that data and use it to answer questions or make decisions. So, back to the library analogy, I think about, well, how do you make a library more effective? Well, maybe three things. One, you have to understand demand. You have to understand what your users want. Two, you have to know something about the books. Are they fiction or nonfiction? Who's the author? Who's the target audience? And then you have to be able to organize the books in a way that's useful for the users. And so going back to the data modernization part of this, I think first, knowing the demand, That is understanding our strategic priorities and our business needs. That's so essential for figuring out. We can't modernize everything, so figuring out where we want to go, we've got to know what our agency's top priorities, where the biggest decision and information needs. Second, knowing about the books. That's like our metadata. And that is such an important part of what we're trying to do in the Forest Service. Think about building out our metadata and metadata management. I think the way of the future with technology, that metadata layer becomes incredibly crucial, including for things like artificial intelligence, where we're going to have a lot of systems that need to work with our data, but they absolutely have to know something about the data in order to work with it appropriately. And then the third part, the organizing the books in a way that makes sense to the user, to me, that translates as understanding the language and the rules of business. I think that's critical, and sometimes that part is a little bit overlooked. I think in the rush to just sort of get things done, taking that time to really dive into the business needs and understanding the business vocabulary is really critical.
Well, to that end, how do the partnerships that you have to bring forward in your role, to use the library analogy, how does it enhance the library from both the user services side of things, the people who want to get the latest book, and the librarians who are doing the work of making sure the library stands up?
Yeah, okay, well, I can give you an example. I think you mentioned working with partners, and that is so critical. So on my team, some of the skills I've tried to prioritize are critical thinking and relationship building. Because so much of the chief data office role is working with partners and having good relationships with technical experts, but also with the business. So a big priority for us this year in the CIO is business concept modeling. Maybe I can talk about that a little bit as an example of one of the initiatives. We are working with a partner to train our staff to systematically document business terms and definitions, business rules, and the relationships between them. So then we can create visual diagrams that kind of diagram the fundamental concepts about how we accomplish our mission in the Forest Service. Nothing to do with this thing really with data or technology or databases or anything. It's really just laying out and documenting the business knowledge. And that documentation provides a kind of blueprint that then at a later stage we can use to improve our data architecture or build out data models in collaboration with our CIO. And I think starting at this really high level of business concepts, rather than starting immediately with the data systems or the data models, provides a lot of benefits. So two that are really, stand out for me. One is that business knowledge. And so in this time where technology is changing all the time, that provides a really important stability. And it's kind of a counterbalance to the rapid pace of change in technology and the changes in the workforce. So as technology changes, as people change, we can always come back to these blueprints that are documenting our mission and documenting our business knowledge to ensure that everything we're doing with data and technology is aligned with how our business operates and speaking that same language. That's one thing that I think the other benefit of kind of looking at it from this high level to start with is that it helps us see across organizational silos. So when we're building out a data architecture and IT system from those models, I think we can do so more easily with the entire agency in mind, and with the entire agency, not just one application in this area. We've seen this a lot in the Forest Service with our work to report on our bipartisan infrastructure law spending. We received more than $5 billion for a lot of different activities, wildfire risk reduction, ecosystem restoration, and other things. And so when we report on those accomplishments, we're trying to look at outcomes and we're trying to show it holistically. So, although we want to know sort of individual things like how many acres we treated for fuels, how many bridges we repaired, or how many invasive species we eradicated, looking at those independently doesn't always give us the whole picture. So we want to combine all those outcomes and overlay all those data sources. But to do that, you have to have kind of an enterprise view. You have to be able to look across data systems and translate across different business vocabularies. There's certain words that we use in completely different ways in different programs. So So we're taking the time to build out that semantic layer. That language becomes the way in which our data sets communicate with each other and how we communicate with the business. So that's a big priority for us.
Yeah, certainly getting everybody on the same page, reading the same language, I think is probably fairly important in doing the work. You talked about the workforce a little bit. I want to touch on that. Just the idea that this can be systems, this can be budgets, but you do need the people to execute and implement. How is that sort of factoring in the data strategy and what you're doing in your role?
Well, I'm very fortunate in the Forest Service because we have so many people who have been thinking about data for a long time. We have a lot of data experts and a lot of researchers, great, scientists and people who have really been on the forefront of data and analytics in many ways for a long time. Artificial intelligence is an example. There are people that's, what we're all talking about now, and it's in some cases new for some use cases, but we also have areas in our research and development and other parts of the agency that have been doing AI for a long time. So we've got a lot of skills in the agency. I think now a challenge is harnessing everyone together and using an enterprise approach to make sure that everyone is working in the same direction to accomplish a shared. So I think, I look for, of course, technical skills are important, but like I was saying earlier, I think particularly in the chief data office, the communication and relationship building and some of those soft skills, the listening, engagement, and the bridges of business are some of our most important skills to develop. So we have a number of training initiatives throughout the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Actually, we've got some communities of practice related to data visualization and advanced analytics, data stewardship, AI. We've got a data science training program that one of the other mission areas leads, but that we all send people to. So we're doing a lot to really look through and identify the areas where we most need to build other skills, particularly as things are changing right now in the world of technology.
Well, you set me up perfectly as far as the change in AI and emerging technology. How are you approaching that? I know you've sort of touched on it a little, but what's the sort of grand notion of how that is helping or hurting the data operations at the U.S. Forest Service and at USDA more generally?
Great question. I don't think it's hurting. I'll say that right out. I don't think it's hurting. Actually, to the contrary, I think the recent attention on AI provides a wonderful opportunity for data modernization. AI systems require three things: compute, algorithms, and data. And I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but also research. I've seen some research by Gartner showing that data challenges are sometimes the top barrier in organizations to AI implementation. And so it provides this great opportunity to shine a light on data, because the need to have responsible AI that is protecting privacy and civil liberties and having the outcomes we want to, I think that's very understandable by all of our leaders. And then to really know that you have to have good data to feed systems and a sufficient amount of data, I think is really important and a good way to shine some light on the importance of it. And for me personally, I am super excited about the attention to AI and what it means, and how transformational it potentially be. I'm also very aware of the risks. And I have a personal example of how transformational AI can be, and particularly if you have good data. I have type 1 diabetes, and I was diagnosed as a child in the 1980s when technology was very different back then than it is today. So when I was diagnosed, I took multiple injections of insulin per day. I pricked my finger throughout the day to measure my blood sugar with this funky, slow glucometer. I kept a paper log of what I ate, how much insulin I took, what my blood sugar was. It took a lot of work. Now, it was totally within my control, meaning I got to make all the decisions on my own about how much insulin to take. It took a lot of work, and I often had problems. Today, in contrast, I wear two automated devices that essentially make up a little AI system. One is an insulin one, and the other is a continuous blood glucose monitor. So the monitor sends data to my pump every couple of minutes, telling it what my blood sugar is. That's one data input. Whenever I eat, I tell my pump how many carbohydrates I'm eating. So that's another input. And then the pump has all this historical data. It's keeping track of what all the insulin I take, what my blood sugar does, how my body reacts, learning about my metabolism. So it's all this historical data. And using all of those inputs, the pump calculates how much insulin, and it modulates that throughout the day. And it gets continuous feedback from the glucose sensor, and it learns over time and gets better the more data it has. So this has totally transformed diabetes management for thousands of people, including myself. But it all depends on good data. If I accidentally tell the pump I'm eating 100 carbs instead of 10, or if my blood glucose monitor gives a false reading, then the entire system falls apart and can lead to blood sugars that are way out of range and a very bad outcome. So, I share that because for me, it's this personal daily reminder of just how transformational using technology can be. There are risks and benefits, but in my case, giving up some control and making sure that the data going in has led to this tremendous benefit on a personal level that I just feel every single day. And honestly, it's made me really motivated within our agency to just work towards making sure organizations have access to large volumes of data. And I think that this current energy around AI is a wonderful opportunity to get people to stop thinking about data as just a byproduct of our operations, but really as the heartbeat of our agencies.
Yeah, it's really a driving force in a way that I'm not sure people totally understand, because it does so go in concert with the people and the systems that are all within this, in any system for sure. Well, again, thanks so much for being on the show with me. I really appreciate it. It was a really interesting conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it too. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ross. That was a great conversation with Ramona Carey. Before we let our listeners go, do you have any last highlights or takeaways that you want to leave them with?
Just thinking about her transition from DHS to the Forest Service and USDA, it was really sort of interesting to think about how DHS is a new agency, comparatively, 20-something years. And the Forest Service has been around. USDA data in the natural resources side of things has been around for over a century. So that dichotomy is, I'm sure, was quite a whirlwind for her, and she talks a little bit about it.
Thank you so much, Ross. Listeners can tune in next week for a brand new episode in our GovCIO Media and Research podcast feed. But until then, if you like what you heard, make sure you leave a review and a 5-star rating on the podcast platform of your choice. And hey, tell a friend. We always appreciate growing our audience. I'm Alexander Bolova.
I'm Ross John Fortuné.
Thank you for listening. GovCast, along with HealthCast and CyberCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. To explore our content, visit our website, govciomedia.com. Keep an eye out for new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like what you heard, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Have a topic you want us to discuss? Contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.